No. All right, well, welcome everybody to day 4 and session 4 of our SBIR STTR workshop series. Like I mentioned, this is our last session, and as soon as this session is over, we will celebrate by walking over to the hotel, enjoying some very heavy appetizers and some adult beverages. So those of you who are online, if you would like to get offline and come join us in person for some networking, we would love to have you join us. Lene at the end of our session will be corralling everyone together and walking over together to the hotel as soon as we are finished. Today's session is a session that we added during last year's series, and we really wanted to get into just the pitfalls of startups and SBIRs and actually how to avoid those. And so we have brought some really great panelists here today to talk about some of those pitfalls, share some of their war stories, to share some of their experience. You know, we have an IP attorney, we have somebody who was a grad student and is now running a company. We have a faculty member who is also doing the same. And then we have Pete, who is our Chief Innovation Officer, who has done quite a bit. And so I'm going to let each of them kind of explain a little bit about what they have done. And to kick things off, I'm going to hand it over to Michael, who is from Stibbs Co, which is our presenting sponsor for this series. And then I also want to mention that our session sponsor for today is TEAS, the Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station. And we have Lene, who's been my colleague and partner in crime this whole series, that's been helping us put this together. So thank you, Lene, and thank you for TEAS. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
May not hear me.
Oh, this one.
Good. Y'all hear me now? Everybody online? I thought I can see you. So my background, before I became an attorney, I'm a biomedical engineer and worked in the medical device industry for about 5.5 years. I did technical support, technical sales, product development, kind of for a cardiovascular company in the Houston area before deciding to go to law school, where I focused on intellectual property patents. I'm a licensed patent attorney, and really the role that I serve now is providing advice and counsel to companies that are either early stages or even before they've really determined what technology they have, making sure that you've got an idea, let's see if we can protect it. Because oftentimes you have that opportunity to protect your idea through patents or trademarks or copyrights or a trade secret. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just have a really good idea that is going to make you money, but it's not something that we're going to be able to protect with IP. And so I want to work to make sure that we identify whatever is protectable, avoid what is not protectable, and really be able to focus your resources on what is the most important part of your company at this stage, which is developing your technology. So my role, hopefully, on this panel is just to chime in occasionally to provide kind of the legal side of things. I think most of my colleagues are going to be able to talk about their experience. They have all written and I think received SBIR grants. I have not done that, so I'm not going to be able to say anything from personal experience. But we hope that we can kind of support each of you and whoever else has questions from the legal side. And with that, I'll pass it on to Bryton. So.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so my name's Bryton Praslicka. I just submitted my dissertation 3-ish weeks ago. Can everyone hear me online? Am I close enough to the microphone? So I'm now Dr. Bryton Praslicka because everything was approved by the graduate school. So thanks. So yeah, during my PhD program, I had always had entrepreneurial interest. No one in my family is like a super rich entrepreneur. In fact, we come from like a low income background. I got a great scholarship, and I also got FAFSA and all that great stuff from that. So no one was really mentoring me. It's just always fascinating to me. So I had been around various entrepreneurial activities and followed entrepreneurial leaders and just took notes myself. But I was doing PhD, and during my PhD program, we developed some technologies that started to get interest from government and industry. And there was one particular awakening moment. There was a CEO of a company that called us. And by us, I mean me personally, on my personal cell. And he said, "Do you do consulting?" And I said, "I do now." And he said, "What's your rate?" And I said, $150 an hour. And he goes, "Okay." And I realized at that moment, I should have said 600 an hour. I had no idea what, or any number, right? I just had no idea what I could bring to the table, what the technology was bringing to the table. So it started making me realize maybe I could do this on my own. Maybe there's something about me that people are, either drawn to or provides value. So I formed a company, and I had no formal SBIR experience, but I had heard the terms around Texas A&M thrown around. So I took some, actually these slides Lene had sent me. And so that's most of what I learned about SBIRs, STTRs. It is not a magic wand. It is really hard work. It's just like anything in business. You are not just going to go walk into some place and get a customer and everything's going great. I wrote while in grad school over a period of 9 months, I wrote 8 SBIR applications. And the first one that we got awarded was a direct to phase 2, $1.7 million one. And they said that it would start in 9 days. And everyone asked me, "Are you going to drop out of grad school?" And I went all eye of the tiger and said no. And I wrote my entire dissertation before it started. And yeah, God bless my fiance for staying with me. All that to say, it's aggressive, but that was the beginning of really taking the company and moving everything forward. I was able to also compete in a lot of pitch competitions. We boast that we've never lost yet in the state of Texas. We have lost in Pennsylvania, but they don't know what they're talking about anyway. Am I right? So, and now our team we have 6 full-time employees. Our 6th started today. We pay benefits, vision, healthcare, and I look forward to talking about lots of other things later about how my role has changed and what I have learned and what have been my challenges. And I'm excited to share with all of y'all about just the process.
Hi, my name is Sarah Bondos. Unlike Brian, I had no interest in entrepreneurial anything, and I was a hardcore basic scientist, studying developmental biology and the proteins that were involved in that. And late one night, I had been purifying protein, and it was late at night, and I'm not a late night person, and I left some protein hanging, dripping a drip at the bottom of my column. And I went home, and when I came back the next morning, it looked like that drip was just floating in air about 3 inches below the base of the column. And my first thought was, oh, this is gonna be terrible. Not even gravity is gonna work today in the lab. I went and I got tweezers and I pulled it between the drop and the column, and the drop came with me. When I walked over to the window, I could see that that drop was actually encased in a film that was drawn into a fiber that was stuck to the tweezers. And so that's how I discovered that the protein that we were working on self-assembles into materials in vitro. And we've found that it had the superpower of proteins can do amazing things. They can catalyze chemical reactions, instruct cells' behavior, sense and respond to chemical circumstances. But they're very hard to work with because they're not held together very well. So they tend to fall apart and lose their activity. We had a way of getting those proteins into our materials that was unique. and unique because of the nature of our materials. And so we could stabilize those proteins, so we could actually, boil them or put them in organic solvents, and the proteins held their shape and kept their activity. And so this meant that anything that a protein could do, we could do in a stabilized, better, more cost-efficient way. And so a postdoc that was working with me at the time, we went through the NSF's I-Core process, which was something to experience. And but really, really beneficial. I strongly recommend it. And then through that, decided to start a company here in town. That was 2017, and we're now up to 12 employees, and we've gotten numerous SBIR grants, phase 1 and phase 2, and some contracts as well.
Thank you. Pete O'Neill. I joined Texas A&M as the Chief Innovation Officer 5 weeks ago. I could not be more pleased for that. Brief, my background, aeronautical engineering, worked in aerospace manufacturing, brought me to Cleveland, Ohio. I entered into tech transfer world as a contractor at the NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland as a employee of Battelle Memorial Institute. I joined Cleveland Clinic Innovations in 2005. During my time there, I actually left for a period to run one of our companies and came back in to be the executive director of innovation there. Separated from Cleveland Clinic 3 years ago. And I think the part of my experience that's most relevant to this, licensed technology from Brown University. I'm friends with the head of the Brown University Tech Transfer Office. And that technology is related to using machine learning to analyze the acoustics of a baby's cry as a diagnostic of the condition of the baby. The team has R01 funded work on autism, condition called neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome. They have data quantifying pain cries and also documenting developmental conditions originating because of premature birth. And you can imagine, I'm not sure how many, I see some young people in the room. That doesn't mean you're still not parents, but if you've had young kids, every cry is not the same, and you sense that there's information in there, and sure enough there is. And so we think about the technology as quantifying cry into something like a biomarker. We also wrote our first SBIR, was a direct to phase 2. And we were successful winning that, and that was transformative for the company. 1.8 million non-dilutive money is really, really, really nice. So a little earlier in the journey, we just received our notice of award in September. So I've recently completed changing the PI. I'm no longer the PI for that thing, and of course, because I have another job now, and so. But that company has 1 employee and is moving along. So, and we submitted a phase 1 SBIR and received a no score for that. And today, I received in my email a notice that our study section comments are available. I haven't opened my email to know what they are. They're not great because we didn't even get a score, but as much as I think I win everything, I realize that is not in fact the way the world works. And so we have a learning opportunity here. So, oh, and I should also just mention, I have to leave at 3:30. It's nothing to do about this. It looks like a phenomenal group, and I'm so pleased to be part of this panel, but I need to leave at 3:30. So, and my email, if anybody wants to track me down after the fact, is POneil, ONEILL, 2 L's, @tamis.edu.
Thanks, everybody. So Pete, you had just mentioned about the score you received. I won't say what it was again, but and I think one thing I've heard, I believe from most of y'all, is it's rare the first SBIR application is granted, in terms of it's hard to do it the very first time. So maybe if each of y'all can comment on kind of what you learned the first time going into the second time and some ways to try to avoid some of the, for lack of a better term, maybe rookie mistakes on some of these initial SBIR grants. I don't know, Pete, if you want to go first.
I can, sure. We were successful in our first award, and we knew going in, we had been given the advice that it was unlikely to be awarded. My philosophy in life, if you do average work, you get average results, but if you do above average work, you should expect to get above average results. And the fact is, if you're an entrepreneur, you know that you're going to hear no most of the time. And if you're not resilient to that, you're not going to go forward. I recently read a story. I wish I could remember where I read it. Some newly hatched billionaire entrepreneur described how her first 100 funding pitches, she got no, but she is a billionaire today. And so lessons from, but I'm, like I said, I just submitted, we submitted a phase one and got no score. So that's even worse than getting the worst score you can get. And then there's no score, which is worse than that yet. So I don't know why. So I'll read that tonight, maybe. For us, I am an experienced grant writer from the commercialization perspective. The researcher was an experienced grant writer from the research perspective. Nonetheless, we paid a consultant to help us, one, to navigate the NIH websites, which was effectively infinitely helpful because I don't know how I could have navigated those on my own. Eventually, I guess I would have figured it out, but I mean, that's another thing about being an entrepreneur. You got to eventually figure out everything. And so you can either try to figure out everything on your own, which is probably not a great use of your resources and your time, and which then leads you to selectively figuring out what things you're going to pay for and pay for good people. And I found, and I know there's some other, I guess somebody else mentioned some SBIR consultants. We found a really, really good group, and they were so helpful, so much that reassuring, phone a friend any time of the day. I didn't call them that often, but just knowing that they were there was incredible. So I think a message, that's one example of you're not going to be a successful entrepreneur by yourself. Almost certainly you're going to need help from a lot of good people. And even writing an SBIR proposal, plan on and be comfortable paying somebody to help you.
We went with the do it all yourself approach. When we wrote our first grant, we started the company with by having raised funds from friends and family. So we'd raised $800K. And so that was David's salary and a tiny bit of lab space and chemicals and everything. And we had to get our first grant in order to get rolling so that we could continue to build. We submitted our first SBIR and it came back scored, but it wasn't funded. And the reviewers, in reading the reviews, the reviewers had seemed to sort of miss the point about what it was that our materials provided that was unique. And we called the program director, and just like with a regular research grant, you talk to the program director and try and get feedback about what the discussion was like. And the program director had missed, hadn't caught any of that in the discussion either about what was unique about our materials. And she's like, just go through the motions and resubmit. Do your best to answer them, go through the motions and resubmit. And so I don't know if the program director was looking out for us or if we did a better job explaining what was unique the second time around, but we got it on the second go. I think our general experience, we've gotten some on the first round, but I think our general experience is we tend to get them on the second pass. And I think there's some getting in line aspect to this, that the change, we don't feel like the changes that we've been making have been terribly substantive between the first and the second go. It's just that you get it on the second try.
I really appreciate both y'all's answers, and I in some ways have similarities to both answers, but to continue to add on to that, one of the things that you definitely said was speak to the program managers.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, That is so incredibly important. That is just like doing, if you were doing a job interview and you want to go and try and land a job, it behooves you to have had some physical interaction with them previously to just going and submitting some job application and you have some random resume on the stack. That's not only important just because of the personal relationship there, but it helps you understand them. And businesses are about solving people's problems. And so if you understand your customer a little bit more, what they're passionate about, what their funding even means. Some people's funding is very earmarked, like for technologies that do specific things for specific platforms. Sometimes the SBIR solicitation will come out very vague. It'll say they're looking for technologies that do such and such, but really the people on the other side of that have a specific thing in mind that you can tailor your application to. So one, at the start, we wrote a lot of no's and then got a big yes, but ever since then, we've been getting a lot more yeses. And, it's in part, our process has gotten more excellent. Our team knows what we're doing a little bit more. And other parts too, I'm spending a lot of my time preempting these and understanding these programs and these fundings. And then a third thing too that I really want to emphasize is, you said do it all yourself. You said go with consultants. I have a third option. There are a lot of free resources available to small businesses in the state of Texas. There's technical procurement advising centers, PTAC. They're now called Apex, and there's also small business development centers, SBDCs. There's one in Brazos Valley, but then there's also one that specializes in SBIRs and STTRs in San Antonio, and you're allowed to join them. And it's completely free service, and they sit down and actually read line for line my SBIR, and they say, you aren't hitting the rubric here, you are hitting the rubric here. I had even had one consultant sit, and the way that I was writing the budget and the way that I was writing why I needed travel money, they went into the budget and they helped me. They said, no, don't say that. They're going to get upset if you ask for money that way, say it this way, use this justification. Those are all, free resources to small businesses. And that's incredibly helpful, especially if you do that on some of your first goes, because then you can use that insight going forward on your later goes. The last thing that I would say is a lot of us are all really, really smart people. And when you read some of our PhD papers, holy crap, what is going on? It's really, really, really deep. And only people that are so unbelievably passionate about my thing get me at that deep of a level. So you don't need the intense science and graph always. You need to be sure to be conveying it in a value proposition sort of way. So I highly recommend just reading a little bit of literature on just basic entrepreneurial activities, like what is a business model canvas, what is a value proposition, what are some easier ways to express, what your doodad does, that resonates to all readers. So those would be some things that I'd say.
Can I build on?
Mm-hmm.
So have people heard of ICOR? Yeah, we went through that and that helped. That's how we got through that same learning curve. It's a really great program, but it is with SBIRs, there's the research proposal part, which I feel like everybody in this room can handle just fine. And then there's the business component and the business development plan. And that had David, my postdoc, who's now CEO of the company, that had the two of us absolutely paralyzed with fear, just about. And going through ICOR really helped with that. It not only is like a 3-day really crash course in business so that you know what a value proposition is, and but it gives you 6 months and some funds to do market research interviews, and those research interviews really help too, because then you can write into your business development plan. We've talked to 225 people, and 85% of them view this as the major pain point in this process manufacturing. And so it gives you actual data put in there, and through working through all the homework assignments on through the ICOR program, you learned what other companies in that field, how other startups have progressed. And so in the first technology that we're developing, all companies come up and they follow the same path. And so then it's really easy to develop what your plan is. It's like, we're going to follow the path everybody else has because there's a reason it's followed that way. And so it makes writing that part a whole lot easier, but you have to know where to look. The other thing I would say that's, if you're a scientist or an engineer and you're trying to figure out this whole business thing, and David and I were complete neophytes. We hadn't been reading books like our colleague here. The business school has all kinds of student competitions where the students need some sort of new technology that they need to go and research. And so volunteering through the McFerrin Institute over there is a really good idea. Tell them that you have a business or you have an idea, and you'd be happy to mentor a business student group while they figure out some of this stuff for you is a great thing. And it's a good idea to, if you already have a business and can employ somebody as an internship, picking up a summer intern through the business school can help in the beginning too.
I have a question. Bryton, did you go through I-Corps?
We went through sites and then we got into the national program, but the national program would have begun the same day my phase 2 SBIR did. So we ended up having to withdraw.
I guess my question is, for those, maybe they don't get into I-Corps or they can't fathom how they have the time. What would be a good way for them to kind of get some of the same things that they would have gotten from I-Corps if they can't go through I-Corps? So what are some recommendations you would have for like customer discovery if they can't go through I-Corps?
Yeah, me personally, there is a just shorter program at the Texas A&M campus. It's actually called I-Corps Sites. It's a smaller program, smaller budget, less of a time commitment, and that's a great opportunity. To maybe check out the I-Corps suggested literature website. There's a few great books that have been really influential for me. Talking to Humans, Gift Constable, Crossing the Chasm. There's literature from MIT, Bill, blanking on his name right now. I've really enjoyed his literature as well. You can find YouTube videos on each of the sections on that. And I highly recommend you read that literature before you go around and do customer interviews, because there's a lot of fallacies and bias that we as engineers with our baby that we spent so many years thinking about will impose in our interviews, and we'll just hear what we want to hear. So you need to go in just like approach market discovery and approach customer discovery as a scientific observation. This is me performing an experiment that I have certain assumptions that a person will respond in a certain way or have certain beliefs, and I need to test those assumptions, not looking for an answer that I already have in my head, but actually genuinely seeking truth. And put that data together. So there's a lot of insight, I think, in reading that literature and approaching it as a scientist.
Somewhere here, it feels like I should be mentioning my office where I work. And so our office came together a month ago, and we are working quickly to build capability internally. And we're not going to replace Michael or his team. I mean, there's always going to be place for high quality attorneys to really do the deep work, and we will refer companies and opportunities to resources like that. But our team has significant expertise, and will add a lot more expertise. And so by all means, go out and educate yourself, but you can always come to our innovation group. And increasingly, we want to be your one-stop shop, easy button, whatever your metaphor is, of we are your partners for facilitating commercialization of your work, which in one pathway there includes SBIR companies and proposals.
Each of y'all, go ahead.
A quick thing, one thing Beth mentioned is if you didn't have time to do I-Corps, a mistake we made in going through I-Corps was we showed up with the minimum requisite 3-person team, a PI, the student who was the entrepreneurial lead, and then the business advisor. You can come with 5 people. You can have 2 students and 2 PIs, and that halves the amount of researcher work that needs to happen. all the other teams had 5 and we showed up with 3 and we're like, we really missed the boat and we had to do twice. We had to work twice as hard to get through. So I really recommend with doing the full 5. There will be some students somewhere in your department, even if they're not in your group, that wants the experience and will work for it. And in return for the opportunity.
Each of y'all have talked about forming your company and kind of at what stage you decided when to actually create the company and move forward with the SBIR grants and the development. So I think for the next topic, we can talk about kind of these common company formation pitfalls. And that includes what type of company to form, how, who to be a part of the company, how to allocate resources and things like that. And I think it was on the first day of this program, Beth and Lene talked about how for an SBIR grant, there are certain requirements in terms of the type of company, the size of the company, ownership. It can't have non-US citizen owners, can't have foreign entities, things like that. And these are questions on the legal side that we also get asked quite a bit in terms of, should I form a company? Why should I form a company? It's expensive to form a company. And if I'm willing to spend the money, what kind of company should I form? LLCs, corporations? I'll go first to my own question real fast and kind of address it from the legal side. And unfortunately, disclaimer, this is for educational purposes only. We're not forming an attorney-client relationship. We'd like to, if you want to come talk to us after this. But kind of why form a company, in addition to the fact that an SBIR or STTR grant require it to be a company as part of the application, you also want to be thinking about liability protection. And that's really the idea behind an entity. And it's liability protection that goes both directions. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, both in the sense of if you have company assets, valuable property that you personally are sued, you have a legal issue where there's a judgment against you, that judgment cannot go into the company and take assets out of the company. And then conversely, if something happens with the company in the sense that it has a lawsuit, it has an issue where it's incurring liability, that liability is not transferred to you personally. So your personal assets are not at issue there. So that's something I think people need to realize is it's bidirectional. It goes both ways in terms of that's why you want to form a company. And then in terms of the type of entity to form, the most common entities in this area are going to be either LLCs, a limited liability company, or a corporation, whether that's a C Corp or an S Corp. And the answer to which one you should form is, unfortunately, it really depends on what stage you are, where you are in the process. The limited liability company gives you significant advantages in terms of flexibility. It's easier to form. You can tax it however you want, and most people elect to have it a pass-through entity, where essentially from a federal standpoint, it's not even addressed by the IRS. It's a pass-through tax entity. But when you get later on down the process, kind of a few stages from where we are with the SBIR grant, when you're talking to VCs or angel investors, they're often interested in seeing a corporation, particularly Delaware corporations, because that's what everybody's comfortable with. And so you have to make a decision. Do I want to kind of go with flexibility and lower costs now, or understanding the fact that I may incur slightly more costs later in order to do a conversion, which is ultimately not a significant problem, but one nonetheless you have to face? Or do I know that I'm going to be addressing people wanting to give me money, venture capitalists or whomever? Now let's go ahead and just form a corporation. So there's some of the issues to address. Those are things that attorneys or really, Pete and Lene and Beth and Chris and their team can also kind of provide some guidance and information of, which entity should I form now. But I think, the main takeaway that I want to leave with everybody is try not to operate as just a sole proprietorship or just I formed a partnership with my buddy for very long. There are too many pitfalls and too many traps you can run into. And so I recommend, make this decision or evaluate this process early on. So I guess for each of y'all, when did you kind of address this issue? How did you address it? Did you ultimately have to adjust things? Kind of let us know your experience on the formation side, please.
Yeah, I can go first.
Go ahead, Brian.
So we formed LLC on October 7th, 2021, and I used LegalZoom, and it cost me like $600 total, and they gave us everything that we needed, and it was totally fine. So you can do that. So don't think it has to be big enough front. and we've been able to convert. We were able to, reincorporate our articles, like the company agreement, essentially, like move percents ownership around. And then, we've been working with great attorneys to line up C Corp conversion. And it's, it's going to be smooth. It's not done yet, but it's going to be smooth. So you can always change. There are some things that you can't change that you should be very careful about. One of the biggest blunders I saw, I really like being around other companies, like through either micro programs or through like just startup ecosystems, or just going to events and just hearing other things. There's just a lot to be learned. There's a lot of things you can't read in a book. It's just a lot of mentorship, a lot of hearing stories. So I heard of another company, and they aren't doing so great right now. They're still running, but the wheels are falling off the wagon. So they incorporated and it was a professor and all of the students in their lab. They had 14 students in their lab. So there was a professor, and he owns 51%. And then all the students in the lab just sort of divided evenly all the percent ownership of all the rest of the company. And now the professor is still being a full-time professor, but also occasionally checks in on CEO-y stuff and goes, is my company going good? Good. All right. See you guys later. And now there's of the 14 students that break up the rest of the company ownership, there's like one that has dedicated like his life and career to trying to grow this company. And most of the others have either work sort of part-time-ish while they're in school, or some of them have just graduated and gone off and gone and make more money. So how do you think the one student that has a tiny share in the company, that's bearing all the burden of the company's existence, feels now about this company and his general attitude towards it? I mean, he told me this story because he's starting at FluxWorks later this year, because there's no motivation for him, right? Like, you've gotten robbed. So one thing that I just want you to consider in incorporating is like, who should have ownership. Be very, very thoughtful and careful about that, going forward. And like, is this someone that you deeply, deeply trust? Do these percents make sense? It does not just need to be, if you're a PI, just like everyone in your lab or like your favorite person, and really, really consider those percents up front. Of course, you can always move it later, but sometimes you can't if the person doesn't want to budge. So, yeah.
Yeah, we've changed twice, our company structure. One, our first guess at what we should be, we decided later on was not in the company's best interest, and so we changed. And then the idea is, because our materials can do so much, it's more of a platform than a single product. And so the plan was to divide the company into lots of little sub companies, and each would operate in a particular research space and develop products within that space, and could be potentially sold off if needed to in the future. And all those little umbrellas would be under sort of the giant umbrella that held the core technology. And so when we got big enough that we needed to change to that structure, we had to change our business format again. So it is changeable. It's a little bit of a pain in the neck, but with good attorneys, it's not really as hard as it sounds like it ought to be. And so obviously it's easier to get it right the first time, but it worked out for us to change.
We formed straight as a Delaware C Corp. I always had the intention that this was going to be a real company, and I had that experience, so that's what it should be. So I did that. My experience was that was not hard. I found through Google a registered agent in Delaware, paid him $350, and it was done. Now, what was missing there was all the articles of incorporation and the documents. This is something that, and again, we will identify attorneys that are good trusted sources for doing this, because I found an attorney on my own, and I just felt like I got really bad value. I felt like I paid $5,000 for probably what was 3 or 4 hours of find, replace, and a bunch of documents, and got that. And it just, that feels crappy, right? Because you, as I said earlier, an entrepreneur, you do lots of things yourself. You decide to pay some people to do some things for you that you can't do, or you decide that you don't want to do. And then then in retrospect, you feel like you didn't get good value for that. It just feels crappy. It's like, I should have done that. I can go find, replace on my own and do some of that stuff, which leads me to another point, which is, you're smart at what you do. That doesn't mean that you have wisdom in what is in starting companies. And so your experience, that to me is what I think of wisdom. Wisdom is having experience and then being able to observe from that experience, when you are confronted with a new situation, some elevated likelihood, understanding of what's likely to happen, and therefore you're wiser about that. And no matter how smart you are, I don't think you can be automatically wise without having some experience. So I encourage everybody to bring wisdom into your team somehow. Again, thinly veiled advertisement for my office. Please think of our office as a source of wisdom. But one way or the other, and also recognize that the statistics are against you. This is already something that is not likely going to be successful. I mean, that's what the stats say, right? So how do you overcome that? You're going to have to do some things that's, give you better chance, and that, bring some wisdom into your team.
There's a question.
Hi, that's really insightful. Thank you. So there's a lot of literature out there about like Wyoming LLCs versus Delaware C Corp, and there's the legal aspects. There's the protections that Wyoming offers as a state. And how did you view Texas versus Delaware versus Wyoming? How does Texas fit in over there? As like, what's the benefit of starting the company in Texas rather than Wyoming and Delaware? And I had a question which was kind of related to breaking up the company into small portions. Almost sounds like you're treating the big company as a holding company and then breaking it up into smaller LLCs. Is that what you're actually doing?
Okay, why don't you start off and I'll answer the back half.
I am not an expert in company formation. That's why I eventually paid attorneys to do that. I read online that Delaware C Corp was the preferred way, and that's the way I did it. And I like I said, it cost me $350 to have a Delaware C Corp, and so it's not that expensive. I also would suggest if you're going to do this kind of thing, there's doing it on a shoestring, and then there's doing it in a foolishly cheap kind of way. As I just said, the odds are already against you. If you're going to do this kind of work in a foolishly cheap kind of way, I think you're almost certainly going to fail. And so I think if you're going to be in the business of forming a company and you want to have any hope of that being successful, then do it the right way. And that's why I just said, let's do this Delaware C Corp thing. Okay, that proved out to be, that was easier than I thought. Then I got to the point of needing to do the documents, and I said, I'd already had the phase 2 SBIR. I said, I got $1.8 million coming. I should be able to afford an attorney to go do some documents. $5,000 later, and acceptable but not overly impressive legal work. I was like, I guess that's what I get. So that's and you're going to have ups and downs in this. Yeah, please.
To address some of these big questions from a legal standpoint, whether you form an entity in Texas or Nevada or Oklahoma, Wyoming, Delaware, there are not great differences from a legal standpoint. Truly, there are some practical differences. For example, Delaware keeps the ownership of companies. Generally, that's kept confidential, whereas in Texas, that's generally known. And in other states, I think Nevada keeps it confidential. So you have different aspects in that regard in terms of the ownership, in terms of how an LLC or a corporation or things like that function. Across the 50 states, they're substantially similar. Delaware is just very popular because back in the 80s, they developed an entire court system, a chancery court system. That's what they did, was corporate law, and they're very, very good at it. And so people recognize that. People are very comfortable with that, particularly people with lots of money, the money you're trying to get, are just very comfortable with the, I guess, the certainty or the, what you can expect out of Delaware. From a practical standpoint, legally, it really doesn't matter. We generally will say, if somebody is eventually going to be looking for venture capital funding, angel funding, particularly funding from outside of the state of Texas, Delaware C Corp, you're never gonna go wrong with that. And so we form Delaware C Corps all the time. If we have local businesses that are not gonna be going down the venture capital road or seek outside funding, there's really no reason not to just keep it local and form a Texas company. But these are the types of questions which you're asking. Not working?
We
These are the type
can,
of questions you're asking.
Just pass that along.
Yeah. Right. The right analysis in terms of determining what works for me, because what works for you may not work for the other company. There may be pros and cons depending on exactly what you want to do. And somebody alluded to earlier, it's also going to depend, or I think this is what you were talking about, how many people are going to be a part of that company. If you're going to have just one owner or two owners, who's going to have certain voting rights. And so the level of complexity can go from, I'm just starting out, I have a few $100s, I'm going to get what's going to work right now. And it does work, to, I have lots of money and I want to make this wildly complex right now. So there are a variety of options. So I hope that answered the first part of your question. The second part had to do with, I guess, was Sarah, how you were forming an umbrella company with kind of smaller companies underneath that own different parts of the assets. And I guess you can go ahead and address. Oops, sorry.
yeah, the reason for that was all about IP. That with our materials, we wanted the patents covering the composition of the materials and oh, we lost it. Hi, oh, we're back. We wanted that to stay within the company for all time, hopefully, but be able to develop products that would be separate and we could interact with other companies separately without having them being able to gain control over the founding patents. We're covering just the materials aspects themselves.
And that type of structure is not all that uncommon in terms of, you'll have the actual intellectual property owned by a single company, where it'll have an exclusive license out to either operating or other companies. And those companies are the one that you can offer certain parts of equity into them. So you don't actually, you're selling equity into the entity that has a license to the IP as opposed to the IP itself. And so it can add a layer of protection. And so there's all sorts of different structures and methods you can have to protect yourself, such that if you get investors that maybe are getting overly aggressive, or maybe you're not end up not being the right fit for you, that you have not really hooked your entire company, all of your intellectual property to that one person. And so there's a variety of ways to do that. And certainly the way y'all, it sounds like you structured is very common and usually very successful at doing that. So did you have anything you wanted to add, or? Okay.
I have a rhetorical question for just to also, yeah, like scope question too. Did you immediately break your company into 3 different holding companies, or did it take a little bit of time before you knew to do that? And I guess bringing it back to the scope question too, is it's like, should you worry about that right now, do you think? Or do you think that that's like a down the road once you figure out what the full business model is and whatnot?
We went ahead and did it just so that we could house the IP in the different subsidiaries. That once we were starting to receive, multiple patents, it seemed it was a good time to go ahead and do it. And we were starting to get interest from the outside about our materials. We felt like this is not something we wanted to do haphazardly at the last moment, but anything that we could do in advance, because we felt like, once we decide that we're going super public and we're telling everybody what it is we can achieve, things could move quickly. And the more that we could do ahead of then, so that we have less to worry about in those panicked months, would be better. Did you have, I wanted,
Well, again, from the wisdom perspective, I had earlier experience in another startup that had an opportunity to sell off a product line, and because we had not broken that into a separate company, we were given the guidance that was going to look like revenue into the company and get taxed in an unfavorable way, as opposed to if we had formed it as a separate company. So we ended up going through some gyrations of selling the entire company and then having to move all of the assets that were not sold into a new company. And so, yeah, after the fact we got there, but I think if you have any ability to visualize or understand what your exit is likely to be, that's also a significant guidance on how you would think about structuring the company initially to anticipate and facilitate a sale down the road. And if it's going to be, if you're going to have different, so for example, this baby cry, we think about some home-based applications that could be acquired by Teladoc or some way like that versus hospital-based applications could be acquired by somebody differently. And so at some point we would likely think about having separate entities for those different applications, mostly for the purpose of anticipating an exit down the road and facilitating that. So it looks like a simple acquisition of that thing that you can draw a circle around, as opposed to trying to carve out a piece of an existing company and then how does that revenue into that company get taxed?
Before Michael goes on with the next question, I wanted to highlight two things that Bryton had said. One was he told the story about the professor that took 51% of the company and divided everything else among his 14 students. As faculty, I know this, I'm describing me and probably some others in the room. I don't necessarily mean to like throw shade on anybody, but it's really hard to let go of control. That we got to this point because we checked everything and then we double checked it, and that's why our experiments worked, and that's why we were able to proceed. And ceding control to somebody else, especially about something that's important as, you know, trying to start a company, and it's the reason why your research exists is that you're hoping it can go out to the world and help somebody one day, is utterly terrifying. But it is really, really important to give control of this to a trainee of yours that you trust. That if you try and be the leader of this and be a professor at the same time, it is so hard. It is so hard to do both of those to the extent to which they need to be done for your company to be truly successful and really grow. That it really needs somebody full-time on it, and that person needs to have the controlling say in it. So like Bryant is the student and he is the lead of the company, and he should be the lead of the company. It's best for the company, and it's going to give the best result to all concerned. But it does mean that the faculty have to let go of some control. And I get that part is terrifying. It scared the heck out of me too. But it's the right thing. And now I have to remember what the second thing was that I wanted to highlight.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
It's good that I don't. Thanks for that.
There you go. It was about getting other people to read your proposals. It's just like a normal proposal. You really, really want that. For us, because we had gone through I-Corps, our last question in every I-Corps interview was, when we get to the point of writing SBIR grants, would you be willing to read through and give us feedback? And, you know, even if it was just on the specific aims page or just on the business development plan or the whole thing or whatever. But we went through many iterations of sending it off to people that had been former interviewees and were now helping us with write our proposals. And that's why I think that's why we did so well. And not only that first one, but follow-on ones for a while too. We went through that same process.
We've got a question from online, so I think it's a good transition. So far we've talked about forming LLCs and corporations and partnership shares, but what about the teams? What platforms or sources did you use to build your teams, and what is your advice? What advice do you have for hiring the right people, and what to look for to avoid hiring the wrong people?
That is a $1 million question. A lot of investors, when your company is this young, looks more at the team to some extent than to the technology, because it's very possible, and they know this, that you might pivot. You know, your original very first plan might not be the final plan that works out. Your initial idea of what you think your target market is might not be your actual final target market. You might learn something, you might develop a new technology, right? And so, but the team is one of those core things. You know, you always hear about like Steve Jobs and Wozniak, right? Like you always hear about like Elon Musk, right? I mean, it is, you know, to some extent the leadership, but also it's really important the team that's around them. You know, again, going back to Jobs, there is that second person. So
how did we find team members? For me personally, I take that into huge consideration. That is probably where we spend an enormous amount of time is, who do we need next? What exactly are their skills? How will we be training them quickly? How do we quickly bring them up to speed? And where I found them was all my network. You're an expert in your field. You know other people in your field, or you've met people that can fill in some of those gaps, right? Or you happen to be next to a huge university with a lot of talent where other people have done startups, other people, you were leveraging even like business student help. So maybe that kind of help is what you need. But for me personally, it was people that in industry that had previously sponsored projects. We reached back out and said, hey, remember how fun that project was? How's your job going? Do you want to keep doing your job? And he quit his job that he was at for 12 years and he joined us and he was in our network, and I knew how great of a team member he was and how much he would, fight for this technology, and also how well we mesh together because we're next to each other so much. I mean, I communicate with my colleagues way more than my fiance, soon to be wife, right? Like we need to really click personality wise and fill each other's gaps, fill each other's needs, right? In the company. And then reach out to your network too and say, do you have any recommendations for potentially someone that might be seeking? We had a financial need and we asked everyone in our network, can you make any introductions for us? And they made introductions, and then we were able to bring those people in. I would try and wait as long as possible to like just posting a job or, just saying, hey, I need some engineer to do this blank thing. Because you don't know what you're going to get, and it's so expensive and it takes so much time if you bring in the wrong people. And when they're 50% of your team, or even if they're your fourth hire and they're 25% of your team, that's a huge percent of your team and to make the wrong choice on. So that's my bet on that.
Yeah, we hired people that I knew, that, the people from my laboratory or students that I have taught that I'd worked with for years already, and we already knew that both of us could work well with. And so, and then we started hiring people, it became people that our people knew. So we're sort of down to that second generation now, but so far we haven't hired anybody just blankly, like from a job posting. It's all been people that we were certain that we could work with. And some of these were even people that one of the persons that we hired was already working in another company in town. She called me for a letter of reference because she was applying to a larger corporation in town. And I said, my little company's hiring too, if you're interested. And she ended up coming to our little company for lower salary just because we were much more relaxed about, if your kid has a dental appointment, nobody's going to freak out that you're leaving in the middle of the afternoon to take them to the dentist. And with children at the time, that was more important to her than the extra salary. But we got somebody in that way that had a lot of experience with SBIR grant writing. She was fantastic and really helped transform the company's success there. So it's we haven't hired anybody that we didn't know well yet, even though we're up to 12 employees.
I think the answer to that question is contained in the question. It's you're forming a team, you're not hiring employees. And I think team and family are right next to each other when you think about the way people develop relationships. You said it, you're going to spend more time with your team likely than your spouse, and you're going to go through stress. And so when I interview people, I know people, I've done interview pairs, and there's the person that asks all the typical interview questions. Tell me 3 things, stressful, all those kinds of things. And I'm the opposite. I want to know, is this somebody that is likely to want to work with me, and I'm going to likely want to work with them, because you said it. Otherwise, you're going to spend a bunch of energy unwinding it and having to do it again. So if you think about your small company as a team, as a family, I think that's a huge step in the direction of success versus just assembling a number of employees.
I'm going to do a follow-up question on that. Each of y'all are researchers, scientists, engineers. At what point did you decide you needed to bring someone in with a complementary skill set in terms of business development, kind of a CEO, CFO, COO type role? When did you decide you needed that type of experience, if you have yet?
Pitch competitions. Nobody was getting what I was talking about. That was the first awakening that I needed business mindset. Engineers are so arrogant, and so we always are like, if you get an engineering degree, you can do anything. I guess that's true, but also you could do that with an English degree, because either way you still have to go back to school and learn stuff, or learn by doing. I mean, anyone can learn anything if you dedicate enough attention and time, right? But it does take a lot of attention and time. And so, know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, and recognize that, if you have the arrogant engineer mindset that luckily has been like beat out of me to some extent. I'm still, got other issues that I got to work through, but thanks for the super loud laugh. That pitch competitions was a huge awakening. And then now, we did not go immediately into CFO. I was able to get a lot of support to write grant applications, and, to some extent, sure, engineer, scientist, we are good at numbers. Sure, you can do basic, write a budget, you can do basic, yada, yada, yada. But the second you start having multiple things, going on, well, really, the second we got an SBIR, we outsourced accounting. And I do look at those books a lot, and I use those books to budget and forecast. But we immediately outsourced certain things. We immediately outsourced things like HR. We just hire consultants to help us write a compliant offer letter, right? Like we, don't spend so much time on those when there are people that literally offer those services, but also don't completely uninvolve yourself. You should learn a little bit about it. And then just recently, now that we're getting to the point that we're looking at really complex revenue with multiple projects going on, and how can we leverage these together rather than just doing project whack-a-mole and all these siloed budgets, but actually leveraging this money to grow the company together. That's why we finally decided to pull the trigger on a fractional CFO, someone that's more of a business partner that doesn't work for us full time, but someone that does spend a ton of time with us, 10 to 15 hours per week working with me and my team, as in a CFO type role, but really they're paid as a 1099 contractor. So that's a little bit from my experience. Yeah.
We got lucky. The postdoc that became the CEO of the company was married to a woman with an accounting degree. And so she was our accountant, and as on paper, she's our CFO. And she handled all of our finances and things like that. Up to a certain point where it started to get more complicated. Once we had multiple simultaneously running SBIR proposals or grants that were on different topics, and different pots of money had to exist and be kept track of, then we went to outsourcing some accounting as well. The higher level thinking, things like business valuations and stuff like that. David's brother has a business degree, and so we're still copying a lot for free from sponging off of David's family. So we don't have anybody in yet that's like a part-time CFO that has real experience in that yet.
Going back to the team word, I coached soccer in a previous life, and so I use soccer analogies frequently. And I think about soccer and team together, because I think of a soccer team is the best version of that is diversity and people in the right roles to be successful. I use the example Lionel Messi. Lots of people think he's the best player today, one of the best of all time. But if I have a soccer team, I'm coaching and I need a goalie and I say Lionel Messi is a good soccer player and I put him in goal, I've made some really, catastrophic blunder there. So with that, where I'll get to is be honest with yourself about what your skills and limitations are. And I said it earlier, it's this exercise, this endeavor of forming companies and trying to be successful is hard enough anyway. The odds are against all of us to think about doing these things. Those odds get even worse if you don't have people that are above average doing the things that you need to do. And there are people who are above average in everything. I think those people are rare. I'm a self-confident person. I'm pretty good at lots of things, but there's lots of things I'm not very good at. And I think being an entrepreneur is a necessary part of being successful, is recognizing that what you're not good at. Now, like Elon Musk, I don't know what he's ever admitted he's not good at, right? So he can run an automobile company and a social media, whatever. So, okay, maybe there are exceptions, but I think when it comes time to hire fractional CFO or somebody is when you need one. And if your company needs one, don't handicap your company by filling the role yourself as an amateur if you really need one. I mean, if you can sort of get by with a little bit of just gap filler effort, then okay. Go contract a little bit of service, okay. But if you need something and your company really needs that, then go hire it, or else, as I said, my belief is, and again, our office is going to, we're not there today, but we are going to help organize vetted service providers so that when entrepreneurs come to us, they don't have to go wander in the darkness and the wilderness hoping to find somebody that will deliver service. We will high quality service at a good value. We will have vetted folks, and you can come to us and we will provide that confidence that you're getting to the right people on top of the services that hopefully our team can provide.
That was a good ending. That was my next question was how to find the fractional CFOs and things when we're used to hiring people we already know. And it sounds like,
Well, and it's hard. I told you, I hired an attorney. I was referred to the guy. He seemed like very pleasant, and maybe that's the right price. I just felt like I didn't get great value. And so and if I had been referred to that person from a well-trusted source, I think I would have felt better about it. And some things cost money. So I get it. Attorney is expert service, and you need to pay, there's a price to pay for that. And attorneys need to make money too. I totally get that. But we will help provide a suite of services that we've done some vetting for.
Yeah, when you're this small, someone like an accountant that you work with, or someone like an HR consultant that you work with, or someone like your attorneys are not just a consultant in a box. They are like your business partners. You really depend on them for certain things. You want them to be responsive. You want them to know your business, because sometimes you don't know the words to express what you need, but they want to get to know your business. So, again, I do not just Google accountants in my area. I mean, these have always been by introduction. So I like being around other entrepreneurs all the time and ask, who did they work with, or do they know anybody? Or, in the case of, in the specific case of our fractional CFO, we at Texas A&M New Ventures competition, one of our prize sponsors is now our HR consultants, and they also do executive coaching. I told him about this need. He shopped around. He made some introductions for us. We interviewed different people. It ended up, now we love one of them, and now they're our fractional CFO. So again, it was still network based. It was still first or second tier of who you know. I think it is really important to take those roles seriously.
So I had a question, follow up to the fractional CFO comment, which is, how do you get in your corporations? How do you buy software? How do you get all the licenses? How do you meet all the cybersecurity requirements which are coming up? If I'm doing this, it's going to be very technology based. So on top of the human capital, there's the huge computing capital? Is there someone who just gives that to you?
I have a few comments on that. One, lots of things have startup packages. Like we got, for example, SolidWorks free for a year and then 90% off second year and 70% off third year. And that's no joke when each license is 12 grand. And then two, software like Microsoft isn't like up for negotiation, but like Ansys is. And I'm very proud of Ansys. I took 74,000 to 12,000 before I bought it. So everything's for negotiation. So that's like the big computing softwares. Regarding compliance, you don't need it until you need it. Like we do major DoD contracts that are like 7-digit and we don't have crap in terms of cybersecurity. But now that we're starting to get closer and closer to really high security, we're talking about like submarine applications. Now we're starting to hit a wall. We do actually need it. So to one extent, we've raised funds that now we can afford like a 50 grand overhaul of all of our IT, services now that it has started coming up. But then one other thing that I wanted to bring up that's really interesting, within like SBIR money, a lot of agencies offer something called TABA, or people say TABA for slang a lot. Some agencies offer it, some don't. So for example, for a phase 1 SBIR with the Army, you can get up to 6,500 of TABA. And for a phase 2 SBIR with the Army, you can get up to $50,000 of TABA. TABA also can be awarded post-contract. So you can even get the 1.8 or whatever direct to phase 2 SBIR, and then in the middle of the contract say, hey, by the way, I'd like TABA. And TABA is on top of the total award amount. So if it's a $150,000 phase 1 SBIR, you can ask for $156,500, where you have a quote from a TABA vendor, and that stands for like technical assistance and business administration or something like that. And there's a specific subset of the statement of work, but like what we used the TABA money for on our first go round was we paid about 30 grand for an accounting firm to come in and completely overhaul our bookkeeping system to be defense contractor accounting compliant, so that now if we got audited, by the Department of Defense, then we would be fine now. And then another thing that we are working towards with the rest of that funding is actually like a CMMC 2.0 cybersecurity model. So you can actually use those TABA funds to get that.
And this.
And this question came online and it kind of relates to funding, especially when you're very new. How are you paying these employees when revenue really isn't coming in yet? Or how are you paying for some of this security or whatever when you don't have revenue coming in yet?
We started with that 800K in friends and family fundraising, so we had some basis to start with. That being said, for the first 6 months to a year, I can't even remember how long it was. David, the CEO, was part-time CEO and part-time still postdoc, so that he was still finishing up projects in my lab and then going to the company and working from there. And since our CFO was his wife, who was working for free/shares, that kept our expenses were really pretty minimal in the beginning.
That's the hard part about running a business is cash flow. You need to pay people to do work, but you need to do work to get paid. So, it's really challenging. But one thing that is answering a question that wasn't asked to was, think about why you're doing a startup. Think about why the team members that are joining your startup are doing a startup. Think about value-based leadership. Think about when we had a really rough November while we were working at full steam with a lot of employees, but it took a long time for our first payments for the direct to phase 2 to start coming in. It was about a 90-ish day lead time of full-time work with multiple employees before we got paid once. That sucked, but my chief engineer that worked for the Army Research Lab for 4-ish years just kept on telling me to defer his paycheck and pay him when we can. And now we have. But that's the kind of team members that you want in these really, really early stages too. It sucks to miss paychecks. But think again about why you're starting a startup. If you're really, deadly locked on every 2 weeks getting that paycheck, maybe startups aren't for you. I mean, they've just straight up, it might be that hard at some point, right? And so if you cannot afford to miss a single paycheck, really, really look twice at startups.
I don't have a lot to say other than it doesn't feel repetitive. I mean, to go back to my team comment, having your chief engineer defer payments, that's a team member. That's somebody, and so how do you hire somebody? You go find, and you can try. That's what an interview is, right? You're trying to find a match. It's a date, right? You're trying to figure out is it a match? You're trying to de-risk that relationship in some kind of way. But that's what you're aiming for is something where, and you hope that that's not what you want to do, because as a lead for a company, you have the responsibility of the members of your family, and they need to get paid. They've got bills. They've got more. I mean, the mortgage company's not going to say, "Oh, defer. Give me a quarter point of equity in that startup. I'll take that as my mortgage payment this quarter." No, not this month. I mean, so that sucks. But having somebody that's so well aligned and shares the vision is, you've got a good one when you get to that point.
What would be your opinion or advice for business owners here about giving away their equity in exchange for services to your company? What would be your opinion or advice on that?
Reverse mortgage your home first. Equity is very serious, and you should be very careful about giving it out. And so go get a loan at a local bank. Go get an SBA backed loan. Go ask your family and friends. Go whatever. I sold plasma once. It was horrible. I get very queasy around needles, so don't do that. Don't sell your bodily fluids. I don't recommend that, but I recommend trying to avoid that. Giving away equity should provide strategic value. Investors are not just money, right? Investors are also new strategic team members, right? That can help guide you and mentor you, and right. So, I mean, equity is so unbelievably valuable. So be very careful about, giving it away to pay a bill.
One of the models that we considered and rejected was when we first started to hire, when we were onboarded our first scientist, and we were still at the time running. We had our first SBIR grant, but it was a phase one. It was a small amount of money, and our startup was finite, and we needed to save some of that startup for expenses you can't pay on SBIRs, like lawyers. And so and we were worried about how to attract this first scientist. And one of the options is to say, come work with us as a scientist, accept the smaller pay, but after 2 years working here, you'd be vested and you'd start you'd own some part of the company. And we thought about that, and we did it for one person who didn't stay 2 years. So it turned out to be moot. But it's not a good idea. If you're building a really good team, if you're picking people whose strengths complement each other, and everybody. I heard this morning in a first generation student talk where I was a mentor. A businessman came and talked to the medical students, and he said everybody wants to be a valued member of a winning team working on something inspirational and important. And so if you've got that, you don't need to bribe people with percentages of the company.
There you go.
I was just gonna repeat, equity is about finding partners or people that are well aligned with your company, not for fee for service. And again, my wisdom on that is that it's not because you're going to have less equity for yourself, and therefore when you sell for $1 bazillion, you're going to get a smaller fraction of the bazillion. I think it's more about you're going to have investors or other people that are going to do diligence on your company and look at your cap table and say, why the hell are these people in here? And if they're not a good reason, the example of a professor having 14 students in there owning 49% of the company feels to me like a really, really challenging cap table to deal with down the road. And I'm guessing that any legitimate qualified investor looking at that is going to say, somebody else figure out that mess before I spend any of my time dealing with it. And so I think if you're going to provide equity in the form of just a service provider, then no. But if that service provider turns into, a fractional CFO or somebody else that's really like a member of the team in some kind of way, then I think that can make sense, because you can explain it of why that person is sharing upside potential in the company.
Fine. Wanted to play devil's advocate, and they said, I want to play devil's advocate and recommend not getting personal loans for your startup. If needed, consider business loans, but do non-dilutive grants and accelerators instead. So what do you guys think about that?
I think he said as a last resort. I don't think anybody would want to have that be plan A.
Yes, to the last resort. I actually have not ever done a personal loan. We've always been able to do a business loan and have yet to take any dilutive capital.
Well, go ahead.
There's one thing I want to say. I come from some training that I disagree with, which was that dilutive capital is evil in some kind of way. And I also celebrate the pride that you have in protecting, being capital efficient and protecting. That being said, dilution from private investors is a highly validating milestone for your company. And yes, there are vulture capital and other kinds of really kind of negative kinds of private investor types out there. But if you find good ones and you can do that kind of deal in a way that where you're not incredibly desperate and therefore have to accept whatever terms are given to you, as I said, I think having that kind of validation, it can't be replaced. Baby cry company. We've had a conversation with a venture firm that focuses in the world of autism. If that firm invests in our company, I almost don't care how much equity. I mean, of course I do, right? But I mean, giving them a little extra equity to have that validation makes our company. And so, and that's taken me some time to get there, because I came out of a world that, dilution is losing control, dilution is losing equity. But there is the other side of that is, I'm not sure how to get there any other way than having that diligence and the validation of somebody writing a check into your company.
I'll say this is a question that we get all the time on the attorney side. People will say, it's almost like the Shark Tank negotiations. Somebody wants to give us $1 million for 10% or $100,000 for 50%. Is that a good deal? Should I take it? And we don't ever answer those questions, because that's not for us to decide. And really what we try and do is provide tools and information for the company owners to make the decision whether there's a value to that. Sometimes getting money is the value, and that's what you need to survive. And that's the choice you have to make. It's not, I agree, Pete, what you're saying, diluting your equity is not evil inherently. Where it becomes a problem is if someone's just giving away their equity just because they can. I think, one of the parameters that we look at is what all of y'all mentioned is there a value add, whether it's in the investor's information, the knowledge they can bring to the table, whether it's there's connections that they can bring to the table, whether it's the validation they could bring to the table where they say, okay, well, this investor who is well known in the industry has decided my company is worth investing in. There's a value to that as well. And so there's no right answer other than whatever is appropriate for the person that's facing that question at that time. And so we just hope that the information that we can provide and that to help the people make the right decision. And so we generally err on the side of try not to dilute until you have to. I agree with that. But it's not always the wrong thing to do. So.
I think Theranos is an incredible example of the power of that.
Yes. Yes.
Because that whole thing.
They can't hear you online.
Yeah. Maybe it's better, right? I mean, I think Theranos is a great example of the power of the validation that comes from investing, because there was all sorts of follow-on momentum of that thing because of some early stage, highly influential investors that I think a lot of later investors never even did their own diligence. They said, those guys are in, we're in. The next thing you know, Theranos happens. And so that's a bad example of an end result, but I do think it is illustrative of the power of getting the right kind of validation of your company and your work.
So I've got a follow on this that I think will help folks. What if you have the opportunity to make a strategic hire? For instance, a technical team hiring a business savvy CEO that would be willing to take a partial equity compensation.
Let me answer this, and then I gotta go. My belief is every person on your team should be included in the option pool. I had a previous company, even the administrative person had a small percent equity in the company. I think everybody that's going into a startup company is taking a risk and therefore is getting undercompensated for what they're doing in some kind of way. And the only way of building that kind of team and that alignment of behavior is putting every single employee in the cap table. So Chris, to your answer to your question, yes, of course, every key personnel, and that goes back to when you have an option pool, size it as, try to oversize it if you can, so that you're not having to enlarge the thing down the road, because and be judicious about giving this stuff out, right? Because when you run out, you're going to have to, there's only 100% in the pie. It's going to come, future percentages is coming out of somebody. And if you have to go dilute the entire table, then that's painful. With that said, it's a pleasure to meet you all, be around all of you. You can find me. There's members of my team that are here that are wonderful and can help you, and we will grow our team. We are going to be growing our team and our services. So by all means, if you have interests and passions in this area, we would love to be working with you. And thanks for including me, and great job, Beth.
Something I would highlight really quickly that Bryton keeps saying as a clause when he's answering a question about something else is, when I absolutely desperately needed it is when I onboarded this expense. And so yeah, I would wait until you knew that you absolutely desperately needed this non-technical expertise, the business expertise or financial expertise or something like that.
Apparently this one's working.
Oh, okay.
Did you have anything to add to Chris's question about adding the fractional CFO?
Yeah, so and it's just per case basis, right? I mean, a fractional CFO does actually not have any equity. However, we have some earmarked for a future COO whenever that day comes. We do have some set aside. However, when I meet that potential COO, that after we've come to be like, oh wow, I would love to work with you forever. I probably will not go straight to anyway, here's your offer, it's this much. Right? I mean, I have the employment position here. I can say, here's your offer at this much. And he goes, no way, no chance. And I'll say, what if we did a tiny bit of vested equity, right? I mean, it's just an opportunity to negotiate, right? Because, hopefully you're bringing in someone that's bringing an enormous amount of value. Back to all these discussions too, just about investment too. It's just like, why do you need money? Same thing with like, why do you need a business leader? Like why, just when you need it, and you will know how much you will be willing to set aside for something like that. But that's not just something that it's like day one, you draw out your cap table and you don't even have a single SBIR yet, you know, you don't even have a commercialization plan yet. You're just like, but we're going to set aside this much for the day the CEO comes around, right? That's kind of weird you don't know. So.
Unless there's any more questions on this topic, are there? Okay, I say I can pivot to kind of pivoting back to SBIR, STTR applications. Have either Sarah or Bryton, have you all served on one of the review panels? And if you have, or I guess, is that a yes? And
Yeah.
then kind of what was discussed? What did you learn? Do you recommend doing that? Because I'm sure it's a significant investment of time.
Yeah, I've served on several.
Okay.
Not to point things back at Michael, but if you haven't got your IP secured or at least applied for, you're not, don't even bother. That's one of the first things people will check.
You can say that again. That's okay.
Yeah, they'll often, there's a lot of companies that are trying to solve a big problem or the same big problem. And so you want to make sure that you've done your homework and looking for what other companies in this research area, how, when there have been startups, how have they managed to go through the process, and, did they exit and how, and because you could, if you're working in an area where there might be other competitors, chances are there's going to be people working on that same problem submitting to the same study section, and all the grants on that topic will be gathered into one study section, and there'll be a handful of reviewers who know that area. And so if you're saying, we're going to develop this all the way to end stage when everybody else sells out to a larger pharma company, when they hit a certain point, then they're going to know that you haven't done your business homework. And so some of this is about making sure that you're providing the right answers for your technology and field. And people will look at that. An underwritten business development plan really shows up like a sore thumb. So even if the idea is good and the science is good, if the business plan doesn't show much sophistication in how it was written, it really stands out and it'll sink the grant. Let's see. The research, what you're proposing to do is not so much, not as much as part of the discussion as you would think it would be. So long as you're proposing something that sounds feasible and is a sensible way to approach solving that problem. A lot of the discussions can focus more on the other parts of the proposal. Have they developed it? Have they, put together a good team? Do they have any kinds of track records of success? And so, that can be participating in pitch competitions. It could be working with the Mays School and having a student team do research, and that student team took the prize in their little competition for student teams developing, developing a business plan for a startup. I mean, literally just any kind of any little thing when you're a tiny company that's submitting their first SBIR is track record. And there's a lot of opportunities for that around A&M. Fortunately, we're part of a big school. And so I really recommend, getting in touch with the McFerrin Institute and trying to get involved in some of those things too. Because hey, a line on this, a line in that business development plan is a line that that's helpful. Who your board of advisors are is really important. And so a lot of our advisors came out of when we did ICOR and we did those interviews. People that were in the field, became part and were excited by our technology, became part of our board of advisors. And they've read our grants and they've advised us on as we proceeded. But that carries a lot more weight than you would think too. It's so easy as scientists and engineers to focus on I need to write a grant because we need to achieve X, Y, and Z. And that's a small fraction of the discussion on these panels.
I've never served on a reviewy thing, and I agree.
We agree. Thank you, Sarah. I think you mentioned IP rights, and so I'll take a minute here to discuss kind of the interplay of SBIRs and IP rights, because it can be, I don't know if it's necessarily complicated as much as it's convoluted. It really comes down to the invention. If there's an invention that it comes out of the SBIR grant, it's called a subject invention. The government gets a irrevocable, royalty-free, paid-up, non-transferable license to that technology. That's kind of the exchange for the money. They get that license, you get the money, and you're oftentimes obligated to file a patent application on that technology and really develop that technology. The SBIR grants, going back kind of the origins, the idea is that this is the government is helping to spur innovation throughout in a small business community. And so there is this obligation really to apply for the patents and apply and kind of develop this technology. And when you use the SBIR grant money with respect, thank you, with respect to developing your invention, can have pretty serious implications as to whether or not the government has these SBIR rights, whether they have this license to your technology. And this is an area that I've seen several grant applicants kind of get confused in terms of, they say, I've conceived in patent world, you have this conception where I've conceived this idea, I've really become convinced that it is going to work, so I'm going to apply for an SBIR grant. But because I already conceived of it long before I ever received SBIR money, it's my invention. The government does not get any rights to it. Well, that's not true necessarily. If you use any of the money to actually develop the concept, the invention, what's called reduction to practice in the patent world, the government gets its IP rights there. It's called the last mile funding. And if you've got your invention all the way to the very last point where you're just trying to finally prototype it or get the benchtop proof of concept, if you use SBIR money for that, the government gets its irrevocable license there. So it's just something to be aware of. Sometimes that's fine. That's what you needed the money for, was to take it to the final step. And so there is though that interplay between the money you receive from the government and what rights you have to give up in order to receive that money. Also within SBIR, I've had questions about, and you hear about this in the news, what are called march-in rights. You hear them talked about, particularly with prescription drug prices right now. It effectively says that the idea behind it, this is going back to the Bayh-Dole Act from 1980 or whatever, that if government-sponsored technology, government-sponsored inventions, of which these would be, these subject inventions, if the owner of the technology, which would be each of you, if you fail to commercialize it or fail to use it in a way that is beneficial to society, the funding agency can step in and say, all right, we're now going to use our originally non-transferable license to license out your technology to other third parties. Sounds very scary. And it gets floated around in the news and in Congress every now and then. In the 40 some odd years that march-in rights have existed, they've never actually been used. But you'll hear about that phrase sometimes. You'll hear about people concerned about, oh, what about government? Will, if I don't develop my technology fast enough, I don't monetize it fast enough, will the agency step in and use the march-in rights to sell it off to my competitor? No. And there's a lot of arguments, I won't get into them legally, that can't even happen. It's sort of in the statute and people want it to happen, but there's no real case law to say that that's truly effective. Any questions on IP specifically at this point? I see Beth waving her hand. No. Oh, okay. I think I saw one over there. Yes.
If you shout it out, we can just repeat the question for the people
Sure.
online.
Thanks. I think there's some confusion about, at least I have some confusion, if the government's the only customer of this invention, the company that has made the invention, they can manufacture it for the cost that it costs to make it and sell it to the government, is my understanding. I don't know about the profitability. They have a right to make a profit, I think, on that invention, even though the government's the customer. So maybe you could elaborate a little more about that.
Sure. So the SBIR IP rights are a non-exclusive right to the government. So the government can use your technology really for however they want. Usually there is a cost involved, but it does not prevent you as the intellectual property owner from licensing it out to anybody else. So it's not an exclusive relationship between you and the government and Bryton.
Yes, one example is we developed a technology while at Texas A&M for a project for NASA. They wanted motors that could spin really good on the dark side of the moon. We developed some stuff, we patented it, and then we had a call like 6-ish months ago, and they were sharing their screen with us, and they were developing the thing that we had developed, and they said, we had some questions, how did this part go here? And NASA, just for like this one-off application, is currently actively developing that to try and in this case, it was actually on the like next version of the James Webb Telescope. So like they still like reserve the right to do research and make a prototype goober to help them spin stuff on the James Webb Telescope. I don't know very much about space, but that's like an example, I think, of them practicing it.
I think that's exactly right. So the distinction is that you still, as the owner of the IP, you still have the ability to cultivate your market out in the private marketplace. It's just the government can choose to use it or not on their own for whatever fee or no fee that they choose to pay you for that. Does that help clear that up? Okay. Hold on. Yeah. We'll get your question at some point. Go ahead. Yeah. I couldn't play here, sorry.
Thank you. So that was great till you said the last thing. So just so I hear this right, so the government holds the right to release the technology free of cost to the public as well
No,
as used?
no. If that's, no, the government has a non-exclusive license for it to use it. NASA, other portions within that government agency, but they cannot license it out to anybody else. It's non-licensable and non-transferable. So you are the rights holder, just as you would if you had a completely privately funded patent. It's exactly the same, with a single exception of if the government wants to use it for government only purposes, they have the license to use it at that point. Does that make sense? Yeah. And it, because this is different than the Martian rights. It's a good point, Christian, that I was talking about earlier, and really only mentioned the Martian rights, which again has never actually happened in the 40 some odd years they've existed. It's just you hear about them mostly with pharmaceutical drugs in the news and in Congress. They talk about how the government will step in, and so I really more just say that as if you hear about Martian rights, don't really worry about it because it's not going to happen. So does that help alleviate your concern? Yeah, no, the government can't take your technology and then just start handing it out freely to private companies, your competitors, businesses, things like that. Now, what it means is that if NASA or somebody else wants to use it for their technology, they can.
I had a non-IP question.
Well, I will allow it.
Sorry. So over the course of the workshop, we've been discussing pretty heavily the influence of I-Corps in developing a commercialization plan. And I was just wondering if you guys could share some insights for how to develop a commercialization plan and also in turn a business development plan that would really set yourself apart in the SBIR process.
Sure. Right question.
I need time to think.
Yeah.
Sarah, go ahead.
For us, a lot of it is a lot of the some of the business, the commercialization or the business development plan, in the beginning was just convincing the reviewers that you're actually addressing the true pain point in the process. And so some of that was discussing our data from our market research done through I-Corps. They are not so interested in parts of the business canvas, like where will you source your suppliers and how will they be transferred to the manufacturing facility. That's not so much part of it. But more the in broad strokes, like who are the major players? What can their products achieve? What benchmarks do you need to hit in order to be competitive? When you say this is the size of the revenues in this area, is your number reasonable? And when you say, we think we can achieve, 15% of the market share, is that reason? You read a surprising number of grants that are from a tiny company with, 2.5 people in it. It's like, yeah, we're gonna get 95% of the market share. And that don't seem particularly realistic. If you're for us, for our very first product, it was a device to purify antibodies for therapies. And the other companies that had previously started to develop mechanisms for this had all sold out to larger pharma companies. And so then we, for that aspect of it, we just had to say, it's like previously in this area, there was this example and this other example, and our plan would be to follow the same overall strategy. So that was sort of the commercialization plan. The business development is more, the team, what milestones have we hit so far? How is the company growing and developing? What experience do people have? Who do we have on board as advisors? And, either officially as part of our advisory board or unofficially people who are providing letters. A really big deal is getting letters from from companies that want to beta test your product. The more of those you have, the better. And yeah, so those letters are really particularly important, because it shows that other businesses have believe that you've found the pain point, and that you have something that could reasonably help them, and that they're willing to put their time, invest their own time into testing it to see if it's better. They're not going to waste their time on something they think is going to be useless. Now it's your turn.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. And I have a multi-part answer. Part one is it's a plan that you submit, and our plan has changed many times. Sometimes even winning an award instantly changes our plan, right? So this is an actively working document that is continually maturing, and the broadness of the unknown universe narrows and narrows and narrows as you start to keep going down certain paths. If I have any general tips, it would be one of the great things that you said was look at what other startups that are relatively similar to yours typically do, because the reviewer typically sees lots of applications and everyone's saying, oh, I'm going to partner with a company and they're going to blank. And then we're the only ones saying we're going to manufacture it all ourselves, fully in-house, yada, 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 right? Maybe you're not wrong. Maybe you actually are going to do that. But now you suddenly also, the reviewer is going, what? And you better have a lot of bullet pointed assumptions saying why this makes perfect sense for you, so you can save yourself a lot of pain if you do a lot of research about what your competitors are doing or what similar companies are doing. That's also going to be in that customer interview process too, learn about what your end customers typically see, what's being done, what kind of timelines are reasonable, what kind of dollar amounts are reasonable. Like if you say, I don't know anything about drugs and pharmaceuticals, but if you say I'm going to get it FDA certified, so I would need $200,000, they'll probably laugh at you, right? I mean, there's what, so just know basic ballpark numbers. And I think also know that, they're judging you based on the assumptions that you're making, how reasonable those assumptions are and how reasonable those outcomes are. They know that it's not the final answer. They know, those sort of things. And was there a second part of the question related to business development, or was that the commercialization plan?
Yeah, it was just business and commercialization.
Yeah, I would say that. And then I also got help from Small Business Development Center advisors that helped me out. Just kind of take a second look at it and then run it past more people. Yeah.
I'll slightly change topics just to kind of go back to the IP side, because that's what I like to talk about. So we talked about IP SBIR rights a few minutes ago, and to further complicate things, but I think it's important that everyone's aware of, there's also kind of what are called SBIR data rights. And that has to do with not necessarily inventions themselves, but the data underlying those inventions. And this is, again, a somewhat convoluted topic and issue. And, we were talking about it right before this panel started. And ultimately what it comes down to is, remember that these applications, because you're applying for government grants, there is always everything is subject to FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. And so there's always the chance that the information that you're providing is subject to these requests for publication. And in fact, most of the information, if you're applying to a civilian agency, is essentially default as public information. It's publicly available information. Now, every agency has a set of procedures and regulations to designate some of your data as confidential. And I think they're fairly generous from what I recall in terms of you can designate a large amount of your information as confidential, but be aware of that fact that if you have to go through that process, you have to mark the information, mark the data as confidential using a specific set of markings and where it goes on the page. And it's unnecessarily complicated, but it's important because if your grant application is part of a Freedom of Information Act, if you've got your confidential data just scattered throughout the application, the odds are the person reviewing it, responding to that FOIA request, that they actually redact all of your confidential information is much smaller, as opposed to if you just keep it all concentrated in a particular area. If your application's on the defense side, they have broader protections for keeping the data confidential, national security interests and whatnot. So it's easier there if you're applying to DoD agencies, but that's something to be aware of. And so that's the data that you're kind of bringing to the table to get this grant. Now, any information that you develop using grant money actually falls under what is called SBIR data. And that data is automatically, for the most part, kept confidential. There's an exchange in this case. As before, when we talked about the IP rights, there was kind of an exchange of, here's some money to develop a technology. The government gets a license to use that technology as long as you turn into a patent. Here, it's a similar idea in terms of we're going to exchange money to develop this data. In exchange, the government is going to keep it secret. They essentially keep it under a non-disclosure agreement, but they also get a license to use it, just like with the IP rights. So it's something to be aware of, that the information you're providing to the government as part of the SBIR, I guess it's really two parts. If you're providing the information as part of your grant, be aware that it's quite possible people will see that. And so just take precautions. And then any data you develop with that money, that will be kept confidential, but the government does have a license to use that. Now you've had some experience, and I don't know if you have anything to add on data privacy. You just marked everything confidential. That's the way.
We have a DoD thing, and we
Yeah.
have a template for everything that we send them, and we just base it off that template. And yes, it's very particular, exactly how it's said.
Yeah.
We got help with that.
Yeah, and on defense side, it's much easier to mark everything confidential. And they do have provisions scattered throughout the regulations where if you have software that's getting developed or trade secrets, there are mechanisms to keep that information protected. Because again, the whole point of these programs is to spur innovation in the small business community in the United States. So the government wants to ensure that the exchange of money in order to spur information is always there. They want to promote that business growth, but they also create a number of hoops to jump through. One last thing, kind of just one more legal related thing. Also be aware, again, this is a government grant. So if you're going to start using this technology, sending this data overseas, there is a whole host of export controls, ITAR and other regulations that you have to be very, very aware of, and that violations. These are, if you're sending this information to foreign countries, either for research purposes, development purposes, really any reason, just be aware of the fact that there are going to be a host of export controls and regulations that you need to make sure you're complying with, because they generally do not have a whole lot of tolerance, and those penalties and fines can be fairly significant. So just think, if it's not going to be domestic, make sure you check first. Beth, any other questions at this point, or wrap it up? Okay. I have expended all the knowledge I have. So that's really it. I don't have anything else. Bryton, Sarah, y'all have been the stars. Anything else?
Have fun. I think it's fun. Like, it is a lot of hard work, but I don't have any plans of doing anything other than this going forward for a long time, because it is really fun and I am really passionate about it. So remember to have fun and celebrate the wins, and remember what you're fighting for and why you're doing this, and make sure that your team knows what you're doing, why you're doing this, and what we're fighting for too.
Yeah, I keep going back to everybody wants to be a valued member of a winning team that's doing inspirational work. And, if you keep that sort of at your forefront, it's going to be a lot of fun and things will work out.
Well, great. Let's give a round of applause for our panel. That was really good. So, it was really good. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch that one a couple times. But just thank you everyone for joining us. This has been a really, I think our best series yet. We had really great panelists, really great audience questions, and really appreciate those of you asking questions. And we're excited to see perhaps some SBIR proposals come through. But I would say if you have questions for a panelist, I would tell you to stick around here. But actually, if you have questions for a panelist, I hope instead of doing those questions here, if you'll walk on over to the A&M Hotel, which is just on the other side of the MSC. And we have a reception that is generously sponsored by Stibbs Co. At the Block T bar. It starts in 30 minutes, which is just enough time for you to walk through the MSC and maybe buy some things at the bookstore. But we hope you will join us at the reception. And if not, we will see you again next year for the SBIR series. So thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, for having us.